afternoon. I know when we were planning for this session, it was going to be extremely upbeat and full of new ideas to launch us into deeper cooperation. I recognize Jeff's message has made all of us pause, and we are living in times where we have to be able to do multiple things at once, so we will hold the people impacted, particularly in British Columbia, very close to Vancouver, where our headquarters are based, in our hearts, and continue to engage in the task which we are given for this session, which is to think through what are some next steps for engagement between Canada and ASEAN. To help us do that, we have three brilliant thought leaders. They all have day jobs, but the reason they have been selected for this panel is because they're also thought leaders and have ideas and don't hold back in expressing those ideas. So we're hoping to have a robust final session exploring issues, like I mentioned, both in Canada-ASEAN relations, but also unpacking what this current moment means in terms of building national resilience, building regional resilience within ASEAN, and then what that means in terms of partnership opportunities. We began our 2 days together by very much reflecting on Prime Minister Carney's speech at Davos, his words that the world is going through a rupture, not a transition, and that moment of disruption provides opportunities for middle powers, and certainly middle powers within ASEAN, as well as with Canada. Of course, it's easier said than done for middle powers to come together. There are also reasons why middle powers haven't traditionally worked as closely together. And of course, while we might be all coming together, there are still elements within the US and China and the China-US dynamics which might be impacting how much we can do together and what would be the limitations. So we have with us His Excellency Satvinder Singh, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the ASEAN Economic Community. So of course, he'll be speaking from the ASEAN perspective of what ASEAN is doing to build resiliency within the region. We also have His Excellency, the Director General of International Trade in the Government of Indonesia, Djatmiko Witjaksono. I will just call you Pak Djatmiko because I am very terrible with names. And finally, we have with us a commentator from Bloomberg and a very well-read journalist here, Karishma Vaswani. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. I will start with you, Excellency, to brief us on ASEAN's current plans around building resilience. Sort of how are you taking advantage of this moment, both opportunities and challenges?
First of all, Vina, thank you so much, and thank you to you and the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada for bringing all of us together. I'm sure Djatmiko and me are pleased to be here from Jakarta. Let me first say that obviously there's so much happening on the global stage geopolitically. It's unprecedented times, and I can imagine every one of you business leaders, it's challenging trying to decipher. But the silver cloud I just want to share with everyone is that as we are taking stock, even the entire 2025, what happened, is probably one of the worst disruptive years in terms of global economic trade, where trade reciprocity measures were enacted. And in our part of the world, we were one of those economies. The 10 economies actually were very deeply impacted. In fact, our tariffs were some of the highest. But it was also a year where we had all worked very hard to bilaterally work circumstances with the United States and come to a landing where it was bearable for us. But taking stock of where we are, I just saw the numbers come out from the Asian Development Bank assessment of the full year performance. Because when we first started in 2025, we were projecting the region is going to grow at best 4.2%. And basically we were looking at 3.7 to 4.2%, 4.2, 4.3 at best. But when we saw the numbers that came out just a week ago, it's startling. We actually grew as a region 4.5%. It's just like a good year number. But even more interesting is, when I looked at the trade numbers, amazing again. We thought that trade will be lackluster, not exactly. It was like a good year. We actually, in ASEAN, grew 8.8% on trade. And that's incredible, despite all the challenges. And what even shocked me was those countries in ASEAN that actually had their tariffs enacted, especially with their flows with the United States, actually some of them had double-digit growth. I just don't understand, yeah. But that's the numbers, okay? These are real numbers of what has happened, right? The US actually has bought more and traded more with us, despite the challenges. Now, when we talk about investments, again, another shock. The global investment environment is minus 11% for the whole world last year. But in ASEAN, once again, in 2025, we are able to attract 8.8% growth on investments. This is already on a very large base of 230 billion. So to me, and when I look at the Canadian ASEAN number, again, 2024 was a good year. I'm sure, I've not looked at the Canadian number, but I'm sure it's going to be a higher number than where we were. So what I'm trying to lay on the ground is that despite the challenges, the resiliency of global economy, the resiliency of all of you in this room here, is contributing to what we are seeing today, right? The world continues to do business globally. And our markets are open, and in ASEAN, for resiliency's sake, despite what happens geopolitically, we just launched our 20-year vision plan, 2045, and that was actually launched by our leaders last year when Malaysia was the chair. And that plan actually lays down the ground for what we want to do in order to move forward, to integrate ourselves strongly, and also at the same time integrate with all the global economies for years to come, with sustainable agenda very well entrenched into all segments of our sectors in our plans for the next 20 years. So the roadmap, the work plan is set. The performance of this region is ready. You can see we are formidable in terms of being resilient despite the challenges. I think what I also want to congratulate is actually to some extent, we are quite glad that Canada has now even greater bandwidth to look outside of North America and looking at all of us here in ASEAN. And I must say, I want to congratulate all of your bodies here, including your government. I've not seen a coordination, consolidation, and support from the private sector of groups of businesses coming together in such concerted numbers in our region like what I've seen coming from Canada. Big delegations that I saw in Kuala Lumpur last year, and again, a big delegation here. Again, really, I must, Djatmiko, this is incredible, right? We really appreciate the engagement, the love that you guys are giving to us in ASEAN. We really welcome that.
Fantastic. I'm sure everybody in the room will definitely share that sentiment, that this does feel like an incredible moment for Canada-ASEAN engagement, the number of delegations you've mentioned, and interesting numbers that you shared in terms of the growth, both in terms of growth of trade, but also investment that's coming into ASEAN. In our discussion, I'd love to unpack some of that, because a lot of analysts are obviously saying that 2025 did defy the odds for a couple of reasons. One, the tariffs were not as high as they were advertised, so the actual numbers were more around 14%. And B, there was a lot of front loading, right? There was a lot of actually making sure that you get in before. And then C, there's a lot of investment obviously coming from China to this region. So all of that we will have to unpack to see what 2026 would actually look like moving forward once things settle a little bit more. And if China ends up with tariffs that are lower than some of others within ASEAN, then what does that mean moving forward? So there are some tougher questions still to consider, because 2025, you're absolutely right, was completely the opposite of what many economists predicted. But similar to what happened perhaps at Brexit, right, where it's actually the following year where you really need to look where things have ended up, I think could be interesting to analyze. But maybe continuing on with that, with the theme of sort of how this time is different, I'll come to you, DG, to speak to some of the work that you've been doing, especially the really interesting report on geoeconomics and the task force that you were involved in that looked at ASEAN's geoeconomic dynamics in 2025. So over to you, please.
Thank you, Vina, for throwing a very interesting question. So I just follow what the SG mentioned. We in ASEAN actually try to manage ourselves to be, keep competitive region, right? It's a very, dynamic and turbulent situation right now. I think ASEAN, over the past few decades, we can show and demonstrate that our resiliency is there, right? Starting from the political situation back in late of 1960, that's era by the creation of the ASEAN as a community, and then as well as in the financial crisis and economic crisis. It's always followed up by ASEAN exercise that we can deliver something very good for the community itself, including, for example, after the financial crisis in 1998, ASEAN set up the, for the first time, CEPT-AFTA come into more comprehensive manner. And then in 2008, when we have also the global financial crisis, we can come up with the ASEAN economic blueprint for becoming ASEAN Economic Community 2015. And now we are, after COVID pandemic and then geopolitical situation because Russia and Ukraine, and then now become the geo-economic ASEAN thing that we should be able to continue making ourselves as competitive, attractive, as well as sexy for everyone to deal with the ASEAN. So that's why, but we feel that somebody has to remind the ASEAN itself. So that's why last year, during the Malaysia chairmanship, Indonesia proposed that probably we should, work together with multi-stakeholders, parties, that we need to look into what we have to think about and try to define what is the problematic issue that we have in, not only in internal ASEAN domestically, but as well as with external shock that everyone face. So that's why the Minister of ASEAN Economic Minister decided that we can work together with the number of multi-stakeholder group as a basis of the ASEAN Geo-Economic Task Force. And then this task force are able to, come up with findings. We're trying to give some recommendation also how ASEAN can really, navigating in this very challenging and difficult situation. But the SG has mentioned, amidst the global, dynamics on number of parameters in trade, in investment, ASEAN can still, demonstrate our resiliency. We can attract 11% increase on FDI coming into the ASEAN. It's worth 226 billion US to ASEAN of investment to the region. So I think amidst the individual ASEAN homework, we are as a group, we still are able to, to demonstrate how we are doing our job very well, to integrate ourselves. We still have another, I think, 10 years planning for the ASEAN economic integration blueprint. So, Vina, I think what we have been facing right now, not only the external shock coming from the US policy. This year, 2025, actually is the 30 years of the anniversary of WTO as international or a global multilateral trading system. But the fact is we are now facing a very challenging with the international principle on multilateral trade. But ASEAN stand is very clear. We should support the international or multilateral trading principle. That's one of the recommendations from the Geo-Economic Task Force. Number two, we also should engage positively and constructively with the US, even though our engagement with US is really on a very bilateral engagement, not in ASEAN. It's a little bit different with the ASEAN and Canada. And I want to make emphasis on this. I think this is the time for Indonesia, for ASEAN and Canada to tighten up and to enhance our strategic cooperations. Last year, Indonesia, for instance, we can manage to sign the agreement with Canada. I think the first CEPA between Canada and ASEAN member state in the region bilaterally. But this year, we're trying to conclude the ASEAN-Canada FTA. Indonesia also playing a role as the coordinating country for the negotiation. I myself as the chief negotiator for the ASEAN-Canada FTA. It's been there for, I should say, many years, but of course it's not easy, but this is timely for us that we can conclude this, and this will be, a strategic platform between ASEAN region and Canada region. So I would encourage everyone in this room to really support this process. During the Philippine chairmanship, you are putting the conclusion of ASEAN-Canada FTA as one of the priority economic deliverables. So we are hoping by the end of this year, we can really seal and conclude this talk with Canada. So by next year, we can be more, collaborate in many aspects, not only in trade in goods, but as well as on trade in services, in investment, and many other areas, including trade and economic sustainable issues. So that's one thing that I would like to very underline and emphasize with regard to the conference right now.
Great. Maybe on just that point before I bring...
Can I just say that just because Djatmiko has said something quite critical on the negotiation. First of all, I want to thank all of you here because I think all of the industries, the private sector of Canada, I think you are behind your government now supporting the collaborative negotiations that's going on with the ASEAN side. I see both sides providing a lot of flexibilities, and that's why we just had a final round in Jakarta this week, and I'm told we are really reaching beyond 50% of actual tax, so which is great progress. Remember, like what Djatmiko said, it took us years even do 5, 20, 10% of the tax. And today, in a couple of months, we are already touching way past 50%. So really, the kudos is there. And I remember we were talking last year about just achieving substantive agreement. That means not the full agreement in 2026. But now, both sides are confidently saying that we want the full agreement completed this year. So this is big, big achievement that belongs to all of us here in this room.
Absolutely. We can,
and maybe just 1 minute additional, if possible. Looking at what our experience with Canada bilaterally last year, I told in yesterday's session, we can conclude 10 rounds for Indonesia-Canada CEPA. You can imagine in the 9th round, we just only achieve 80% of the whole text and anything of the agreement. But in one round, the last round, the 10th round in Bandung, we can clean up everything, almost 20% or 15% of the pending issues. So this is showing that how we can actually can collaborate, concerted effort with most flexibility and most ambitious, of course, putting the agreement still, provide benefits and facility for the economic operator. So I believe also this time between ASEAN and Canada, we can do also the same thing to provide a platform for our businesses.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely political desire and full support in Canada, both among businesses and our government, to move as quickly as possible on the finalization of the ASEAN FTA, as you said, to learn from what we did with Indonesia's CEPA. I think what would be useful to hear is what would be the benefits, so sort of to explore, because the political commitment is absolutely there. It's great to hear that negotiations are going well, but it's one thing to conclude an agreement. It's something completely different to make that agreement come to life and to generate actual business and investment two-way, because we do have other agreements as well So I'd be really interested in our discussion to explore what would that ASEAN-Canada FTA unlock specifically? What are the opportunities in what sectors? We've already been discussing quite a bit, energy, food security. What could that look like in innovation and technology? So I'd like to come back to both of you gentlemen on that question, but let me first bring in Karishma into the conversation to offer a perspective that's non-governmental and someone who's really watching both the opportunities and the challenges that exist at the moment for ASEAN, but also for Canada-ASEAN cooperation.
Sure, and thank you so much. And thank you to both the gentlemen, Papa and Satvinder as well. So, I think it would be fair to say that last year we all went through, as you mentioned in your remarks, an annus horribilis, but taking from a line in a speech of Pak Sukarno, the former Indonesian president, I also think it was the year of living dangerously. And it's not like this region hasn't been through, tumultuous periods before. I grew up in Indonesia and watched the country go from a dictatorship to a democracy. We went through the Asian financial crisis, as you mentioned in your remarks. We've been through difficult periods and come out the other end. It was very heartening to hear all the wonderful trade figures that, with the caveats that perhaps this year won't be as fantastic, has really shown some resilience. But in my daily job, what I try and do is look at what the world will look like after Donald Trump. And yes, I know there's still a ways to go, and I'm not being provocative here, but part of this discussion is about the fact that middle powers are finding an opportunity to come together during what has been a really difficult time. And everything I've heard from the two gentlemen today, and I'm sure you've discussed in your sessions before this, and in the speech, that fantastic speech that the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, gave at Davos about this not being a transition but a rupture. From afar, this looks like a moment that has come out of necessity and not willingness. We're being forced into this. I mean, it strikes me that it's taken this long for the trade deal to come together, and in a way, you've got Donald Trump to thank for that, to push you to this moment, right? I mean, I think we need to be grateful for the small things. But really, yes,
Trump accelerator. We've been speaking about
Trump
that
accelerator. Indeed, yes. We've always got to count our blessings, I feel. But what happens when the American system corrects itself? Because I have enough optimism to believe in that possibility happening. Do these relationships then become less important? Do we go back to recognizing the fact that, for all of the desires and they're really important desires, and the political and economic considerations are there, but do we go back to recognizing that the US is the biggest market in the world? And geopolitically, the thing we haven't discussed, and I would like us to talk a little bit more about, but that investment that you mentioned, Pak Satvinder, how much of that is coming from China, a country that is such an important trading and economic partner for this region, but it also is expanding its military rapidly, and we can't be blind to that. So these are really important considerations, and with the caveat that it is my daily job to provoke and make you think, I think that that's some of the kinds of issues we should consider as we pat ourselves on the back very legitimately for having made it through a really difficult year of living dangerously.
Fantastic. I knew I could count on you to be a little bit provocative and to push us to think beyond. I think the questions that Karishma is asking are interesting ones, and maybe if Deputy Secretary General, if I could come to you to speak to kind of the choices that ASEAN is going to have to make moving forward. I think we all are familiar with the idea that ASEAN doesn't want to choose, that ASEAN wants to have centrality, but also the choice to deal with as many partners as possible, with everyone, exactly, friend to everyone, enemy to none, that sort of motto. How are you seeing the current dynamic between US and China, US posture itself vis-a-vis ASEAN, and what that looks like moving forward in 2026 for that strategic autonomy and choice?
Right. So I love the scene setting that you've done, Karishma. So I just want to, but I'm grounded, right? So I'm going to be telling you what I can see and what I see happen And I'll tell you what's happening factually. And right after all of that disruption that took place about trade reciprocity, and some of our member states were given hefty tariffs, some of them even reaching 50%, right? All that took place in the first quarter of last year. And I think you saw Djatmiko mention very clearly our response in the early part. We were one of the earliest regions in the world to tell the US, listen, we know this is important. You have addressed this. Domestically, this is an important issue. We do not want to antagonize in our conversation. In fact, we want to sit with you and see how we can overcome some of the challenges you are confronting with us. And we are willing to even redraw and even see how do we build a new generation of cooperation with you. I think that message that came collectively from the economic ministers was actually very well received in Washington. And how I know this is because we were probably one of the earliest regions in the world where the State Department came back. In fact, it was February, yeah, I even got intermittent messages from the US mission in Jakarta telling the Secretariat, please don't worry, all of your funding, all of your projects that you have with us, most of the funding is already gone through approvals that this is good for the United States and you are going to get all your funding intact. By the way, ASEAN has millions of dollars of funding of development work with the United States. And the good news is that actually, true enough, all of the work that we have done with the United States, whether it's in trade digitalization or in many of the areas that they used to help us, came back. But not only that, today the United States is heavily committed with us in wanting to work with us very deeply into, for example, the ASEAN Power Grid Initiative. For example, critical mineral engagement with the region. So what I'm seeing is actually there's a whole new generation of cooperation now, having developed now with the United States. So it's not like just because what the US has done, and now we are getting closer to China. China is, well, where the US is the largest investor in ASEAN, the Chinese are the largest traders, partners of ASEAN. But more importantly, I think a lot of people have China as the largest trading partner. I'm sure that's not an important thing, but more importantly, to China, their largest trading partner is ASEAN. And the size of their trade is almost double of what they do with the United States. Can you imagine? Has anybody in the room here ever imagined that we are the largest trading partner of China, almost $1 trillion today, right? Why have the Chinese invested and grown their trade with us such a large way? Because 700 million people here, with many upper middle income economies, are inside Southeast Asia and growing, right? Basically, 70% of our GDP of $4 trillion is consumption, both business consumption as well as consumption by consumers. So to me, that fundamentally should be attracting all Canadians that, despite whatever happens, right, look at where the money is, where the engagement is, and therefore, I think what's happening today, where we are getting, don't give too much credit to Donald Trump too much, but I think what we are doing today, getting closer and getting this finalized, our economic agreement just makes sense, right? And there's so many potential areas we can talk about. I don't know whether you're going to talk about now, but if you allow me.
Let's go there, yes.
I was thinking, in the next room, I was just sitting down and listening all the conversations on energy. The ASEAN Power Grid, $1 trillion of investments. We are today kicking ass. I'm saying that, sorry, not sorry for being, but basically, for the last 2 decades, we haven't made much progress. Only out of the 18 projects, 8 projects had gone into feasibilities, and only 2 are fully operational. But last year, we were able to come together, the energy ministers, the finance ministers, and the economic ministers, to say that enough is enough. We need to get wings on the projects in the region, and we want to expand the ASEAN Power Grid now. It's no longer just the connector projects. It will include the subsea projects. It will include the upgrade of the national grids of the countries, because that's where the chokage is. And what they have also committed was to give endorsement to the ASEAN Power Grid Finance Initiative, led by both the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, where both banks came in to say that they're going to put dedicated resources, now $12 billion just on APG projects in the region, bundled with capacity building, millions of dollars, but more importantly, bundled with political risk cover on key projects that are going to take place in the region. All that has actually have come across today, and we are ready now to work with Canadian businesses to bring in the best of class of technologies. But let me tell you one big problem. The ASEAN power grid, especially the subsea projects, the cables, there's a waiting time of 8 years for us to get hold of the cables. 8 years. So I think this is where we would like to work with the Canadian companies who can do this. Please come work with us. We will give you favorable conditions to start manufacturing the cables here for the region because we need lots of it for the ASEAN power grid. This is just one area, the ASEAN power grid. And then, of course, we have to look at the digital front. You know, we are negotiating the largest regional agreement in the world, DEFA, Digital Economic Framework Agreement, legally binding. Even the Europeans don't have that. And we are actually at the final stage of negotiation, which will be coming to an end in April of this year, and we'll be ready to sign. Hopefully 11 countries can all come in to sign in Manila this year when the leaders are going to meet for the summit. But more importantly, we are able to negotiate an agreement where everyone, whether it is Laos and Cambodia or Singapore and Malaysia, they're all on the same platform with same commitments, with big substantial gain for the entire digital economy growth for our region. I think we are going to be in a very good position, both on the digital side, and then you notice we've also updated our economic agreement of ATIGA last year to make ourselves even more open, more circular, and ready for the new generation of global trade. With all these elements in place, I think once again we are in a very good position to handle. I'm actually still confident that we might be able to touch 4.5 again in this year and in the coming years, and where we can move from being a fifth largest economic bloc. I think we are on path to achieving that in the next couple of years.
Great. So 2 concrete areas of cooperation around the power grid, although there are some difficulties there, as well as the digital, which I think is an important element. I am conscious of our time, so maybe if I could come to you, Pak Djatmiko, to talk a little bit. I mean, you said that you're the chief negotiator. You're very comfortable with where things are going. If you could leave us around the ASEAN-Canada FTA, if you could give us some ideas of additional areas of cooperation, things that are already maybe happening or that will be unlocked as part of that, I think that would be really useful. And then how businesses, particularly Canadian businesses in the room, can take advantage of that.
Yeah, thank you, Vina. Before that, probably I just give you some background, how actually this year, at least in the last 2 years, the collaboration between ASEAN and Canada become very more important than ever. You know what? Back to 2005 and 2010, I think that time is the first trends of how ASEAN building our network with surrounding economies in the East Asian region. Because I'm personally also involved in the 5 different negotiations, ASEAN China, ASEAN Korea, ASEAN Japan, ASEAN Australia, New Zealand, ASEAN India. At that time, 2005, 2010, been accomplished. And we've been implemented those first trends of external trade agreement with colleagues from 6 different countries, wonderfully. And afterwards, the second trends, 2010 and 2020, 2011 actually, when we initiate the regional comprehensive economic partnership, which is, solidify and codify all those 5 different agreements into one RCEP, even though in the last minute, India decided not to join the RCEP. And then afterwards, 2020, up until today, only with Canada. Not EU, not US, not Latin America, not country in the Middle East, but with Canada. So I think this is showing us that ASEAN and Canada, we have to be able to, to deliver something that's very important for this region and Canada. And something that I would like to add, maybe useful for ASEAN and Canada, for instance, on the critical mineral collaboration. Because Indonesia, we also have, within our agreement with Canada, critical mineral corporations, which is allow us to, to have conversation and deliberation, what kind of a project, what kind of, policy that will support the collaboration on critical mineral. Because critical minerals now we can become very, issues for today and very important in the long run. So I think not only Indonesia and Canada, ASEAN as a region and Canada should also put some attention on this. We are looking forward. For instance, yesterday we have conversation like Vale, one of the leading company from Canada. They already been in Indonesia for more than 60 years. I think we are looking forward to have many more leading companies or manufacturers from Canada to do strategic collaboration with a number of ASEAN group of business, not only in the critical minerals, probably on the automotive industry, EV ecosystem, and many other things that we should, think this is beneficial for to the regions.
I think what I'm picking up from all the panelists is the idea that ASEAN is feeling, as a bloc, as a regional organization, is feeling quite a bit of confidence, notwithstanding the fact that the year 2025 was a year of living dangerously or a year of a lot of disruptions, but both the actual numbers as well as certainly the confidence the institution is feeling is very much there, that this is the moment for ASEAN to deepen its own economic integration, to deepen its own digital integration, to really position itself as an economic bloc that is able to together withstand the pressure from both the US as well as China. This idea that resilience is found in unity among ASEAN, and that this also then opens up opportunities for partners that are not necessarily just US and China, in this case Canada, that we have a really strong foundation already. I'm hearing from you that the discussions that have happened both on the bilateral FTA with Indonesia as the largest and biggest economy in the region, but also the progress around the FTA with Canada, ASEAN FTA, that is all on a good path, that we have an unprecedented number of Canadian businesses, Canadian institutions, and Canadian government representatives in the region, that we now have a Prime Minister who at the highest level is putting forward a vision that middle powers can work together, that they can be at the table so that they're not on the menu, so that they're able to actually chart a third path and continue to have some choice when it comes to US and China. I also heard clearly from you, Deputy Secretary General, that while China obviously is the most important and powerful player in the region, China also needs ASEAN, especially for an economy that needs to continue to export. You guys have the consumer market, you have the opportunities for them, so there is some leverage in that as well if you can exercise it collectively. And that you want to share that as well with Canada. So I think there's a lot of promise. And I do take your point as well, Karishma, that it's important to have that positivity, but there's still lots of questions. And we didn't speak about the military dimension because the panel was very much focused on the economic opportunities moving forward. But I very much take your point that the military modernization of China is very much an issue, and the balance of power and how especially Canada and others continue to contribute to that balance of power in the region would be relevant, because without peace there is no prosperity, and as much as we want to all focus on our prosperity, we have to also continue to invest in the military and in the technologies that allow us to stay peaceful moving forward. So I think it's a really great way for us to wrap up 2 days of incredible discussions, to introduce two thought leaders from ASEAN and a Bloomberg reporter who we hope moving forward will be writing more about how Canada can also play into this space and continue to connect with the institutions and organizations represented here. Again, a huge thank you for coming from Jakarta to be part of this conversation. We very much look forward to having you in future CIAC discussions here in Singapore, and also doing more in ASEAN, and very much hope that the agreement can be in fact concluded this year, as you said. Has to be, yes. I think that certainly was the marching order from our Prime Minister, and I think yours as well. And we're just 5 minutes outside of our time, but thank you so much for being so patient with us and for engaging in this conversation and for investing your time for 2 days. I'll conclude this particular session. Please join me in thanking our panelists for their insights.